Case studies. How many of you have ever done a case study, read a case study, been a part of a case study? John, what'd you do?
Oh, we've all read a case study if you're in theories. You said read a case study, right?
Done a case study.
Never mind.
Like?
Leah, you're a PR major, right?
Yes.
You got your degree in PR, right?
Yes.
Yes. Hannah, did you do PR? What did you
That's
do?
part of my, I'm doing PR emphasis for this degree.
Okay. So you've had a class in case studies.
Case studies.
What'd you talk about? What did you do?
We went through several actual instances of public relations. We looked at them as different cases in different categories, from investor relations to consumer relations to nonprofit, international public relations, all sorts of different categories, human resources, so in-house public relations. And the class was divided up into these different chapters that you would do a case over and present it. And I know in my case we did nonprofit, so we looked at Earth Hour and looked into what that nonprofit was all about, and did an in-depth discussion about what they did with this particular campaign to promote Earth Hour, what their objectives were, what the research was behind those objectives, how they carried out their program, and then we evaluated it. And
Okay.
that was pretty much how the class went most of the semester.
What do you notice about the name of the methodology, case studies?
Singular.
It's singular. It's not cases studies, it's case studies. You're specifically looking at one individual case. Okay? So I may have the entire environment of the public relations office at the University of Central Missouri. And they do media relations, they do publications, they do campaigns, they host special events, they do all kinds of different things in university relations in PR. All right? I could do even another circle here and say this is the environment of special events. Okay? And that's talking about all the different events they host. They host commencement. They host the State of the University. They host inaugurations. They host guest speakers. 2 summers ago, they hosted Barack Obama. I can never remember. Is it 2?
One.
Thank you.
Michael Jordan written with 2 when he just put his photograph on.
I saw that.
Read about it yesterday. I knew it's going to be useful.
Well done. Our focus is going to be on Barack Obama's visit. Okay? Now, within Barack Obama's visit, there was the security detail. There was the publicity for him coming to visit. There was working with the UCM Media Network and with KMOS to broadcast the event. There was the media relations with the media from Kansas City and Columbia and St. Louis. There was the overflow over into the Union and how they did all those things. Okay, so you've got all those pieces. You could even focus it even further to the media relations aspect. The focus of a case study is to get very concrete. What exactly is it that I'm wanting to study? What exactly is it that I want to learn about? I don't want to learn about the whole thing and everything surrounding it. I want to learn how did they do their media relations. Because they had to work with the White House to get permissions. They had to work with the area media to let them know when it was coming. How many of you got to go to that? I don't care if you're a President Obama fan or not. When the president comes to your town and to your university, oh my Lord, that is cool. Okay? I don't remember where I was going with that. It's a big deal, and there's lots of things around it. And you find out about Secret Service agents. Do you know that they're not just they're really fun. They're talkative. My kids had to keep going back and forth to the bathroom. They would talk with them and joke around with them and stuff. But then if you, after the president speaks, and you try and step back around behind the stage to see the provost, because she's there and she says, "Hi, Joe," and you take a step to see him, oh dear God, back up to the wall. Okay? So you're learning about all of these aspects. But do you care about all these aspects for this study? No, I'm studying public relations. You know, if I were studying criminal justice or if I were studying security, I might want to know about the security details. And I want to study what it was that they did in that aspect. Okay? You think about Virginia Tech. And we look at the shooting that happened at Virginia Tech. And why do we study this? Because we want to study how did they get communication to the students. What did they do to alert the student body of what was going on and what were the best things for them to do? How could they be safe? You look at Sandy Hook. And what was it that took place within their security system for the school that allowed this tragedy to happen? So that's what you're looking for, is those specific concrete things. I say it's particularistic because it's focused on a particular event. Now, could I study media relations from the University of Relations here on campus? Could I study the media relations arm of their office? Yes, you could. Okay. But would I use a case study or would I use a different approach? You don't have to give me-
Studying the office,
I'm studying how they perform media relations and university relations.
that's not specific enough because it's not a case.
Right. They perform media relations on a daily basis, depending on anything. They write news releases about stuff that's happening all the time. You're looking at their operation and the way they function, but across platforms. Why would we want to do this? Why would a case study be useful? Thinking about this example right here and something that just happened recently in the news.
Brian Williams, we were talking about.
Where did President Obama speak last week?
KU.
KU. So KU may think, the president's coming here. We've never hosted a president before. What do we need to do? Well, let's look up and see if there's any cases where the president has come to a university and what they did. And so again, your job as researchers, add to the body of knowledge. So the KU may look in there and say, what did the University of Missouri do? Or University of Missouri. University of Central Missouri do. You usually think KU and Mizzou together. University of Central Missouri do. Okay, how did they manage this? Particularly if something didn't work. Because we want to find out what did they do so we don't duplicate it. We don't do it again. When I worked at the YMCA up in Kansas City, we started this program called the Personal Pricing Plan. And the way this worked was we looked at your gross income for the household. And you paid based on your gross income. The more you made, the more you paid. And we sold it as, this is a not-for-profit organization. We're trying to make families healthier. By making families healthier, we make for a better community. And this is a way for you to contribute to that. And those people who can't afford as much, we don't want them to be denied a chance to be healthy, so they don't pay as much. Noble idea. Very social justice type of idea. It was something I really liked about working there. It made me feel good about things. But we were really struggling financially because of the way we set the plan up. Well, I was about 5 months into this job when I found out we got this idea from Tennessee. Because the Tennessee YMCA put together this same plan. And they did theirs the first time and thought, we're losing money. We need to adjust this budget. We need to adjust the prices. We've got too big of a gap. And I said, what are we doing? They said, we're going with the plan they did the first time. Did nobody do a case study on what they did? Nobody look at and evaluate? It didn't have to be anything formal. It didn't work for Tennessee. Why did we do it? Why did we duplicate what they did that didn't work? Why didn't we look at the one that did work? Nobody could give me an answer. I need to get into education. Okay. It's very contextual because you're looking at within a context. This, for this situation, may not work in other situations. If we had an auto race coming to town, this probably wouldn't work the same way as it did with the president. Okay? You're going to have to think about some other things. It's developed more from reader interpretation. What do I mean by that?
I'm not sure.
Hence the reason I asked the question.
Exactly.
What do we mean when we say it's developed more by reader interpretation?
So maybe you see one thing as being really successful, but maybe someone else who witnessed that same event does not see it as being so successful. And then the way you interpret the case study, how the events occurred and how they happened, says more about you and the way and your results and the way you will do things in the future.
Yeah, you've got experience too. I mean, if I'm studying this case study from a public relations perspective, and I'm looking at their media relations, odds are I'm working in PR or teaching PR or wanting to study PR. So I know something about public relations, okay? I have experience in it. So they may be saying this didn't work, what we should have done is this. And I can look at that and say, from my experience, that never works. Okay, no, this may not have worked, but I wouldn't take that approach. So I'm going to look at it and say, okay, I see where you're going with it, but I'm going to interpret this a little bit differently. Or you may say this worked really well, and I think, well, you kind of dropped the ball. I mean, you got Kansas City and Columbia and St. Louis, but hey, this is the president here. You should have been getting St. Joe and Hannibal and Springfield, everybody. He's not coming back to Missouri to speak. There were ways you could have reached those other ones, or pipe that message to them. You put the message out. You streamed it through your local cable channel, which reaches 30,000 homes in the four-town area. Why didn't you stream it on KMOS and reach half the state? You know, so those are the kinds of things. That's why it's open more to reader interpretation, because you're also bringing your experience into it, interpreting their findings, which you basically do with anything anyway, but they're giving you one specific case. Okay. It is not a case history. What do we mean by a case history?
It's not like you're not going in like just documenting and kind of, you have your own personal, not kind of agenda in a way, but not really. Like, it's not just presenting, here's this historical timeline information.
Are you going to have a timeline? Are you going to have some history?
You'll have a little bit, but that's not the main
Right.
goal of it.
Right. I'm not doing this just to lay out the history and the chronology of what happened.
Yes.
That'll certainly be a part of it. I've got to tell you what we did step by step from one point to the other. But I also want to say, now, how did it work and what factors were there? What did we have to consider? Each step of the way, what was a stumbling block or a hurdle, or what was a victory? Okay, Mike.
So the case study is basically a case history plus analysis
Even more so than that.
and more.
Yeah.
Plus some-
It's got, case history is a part of it. Okay, that's going to be part of your explanation of this is what we did. And to do that, you're going to have some history to it. But it's more taking one specific focus of that case within that even greater environment and talking about this is what we did, this is why it happened. What do you think most case studies come from? Just something that happened, or was there just a historical event, or was there probably something went wrong? Catherine, was that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say that if case studies are more related to a problem and then you come up with a solution afterwards, like public relations kind of thing.
It can be that you come up with a solution. The two big cases that we talked about when I was a student studying public relations here, the Exxon Valdez and the Tylenol cyanide scare. And we did it to compare. How did they manage PR in both cases? Okay. Exxon Valdez, if memory serves, the ship's captain was drunk, had a history of having been drunk. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah.
And he crashed, oil spill, really screwed up the ecosystem, which just now is actually starting to get back to normal. Dove got a great campaign out of it, but you know, that wasn't part of it, that was incidental. Amazing how that stuff works, isn't it? But they tried to cover it up. They tried to say that it was just an accident, unforeseen, hit an unseen reef, it wasn't on the chart, whatever. They came up with these reasons why it had happened. If you think about when I talked about the contingency theory of PR, they took a very very advocate stance. They advocated for Exxon. Well, you could not have been more at fault. You should have gone completely the other way. Okay, and so we see this is how not to do it, because these are the mistakes they made. So I'm not doing the case study as an employee of Exxon. I'm doing it from an outside researcher, looking at the timeline of this is what happened. And this was the result. Stock fell, confidence fell. Obviously those two go together. This is what they did wrong along the way. You flip that over and you look at Tylenol, and they had the cyanide scare, And Tylenol immediately pulled all of their capsules and their pills off the shelves. Couldn't get into the pills, but they weren't going to take that chance. They took it off the shelves, apologized for what had happened, said they were going to be much more diligent and protecting, and then they came up with stuffing the cotton and putting the aluminum seal and the childproof cap that I want to punch the person who did this in the throat because you've got a splitting headache and you just can't, that's the last thing you want to think about is how do I get in this stinking bottle, okay? By the time you're done, you've got a headache and your fingers hurt.
But your kids are safe.
But my kids are safe. And so they did everything. They took a very advocacy stance, or accommodation stance. Well, they could have taken a very advocacy stance, saying, look, we didn't do this. This isn't, we didn't have it in our factories. This happened in the store. This was off our shelves. This was off our books. But we're going to take care of it. And so you looked at, this is what happened. This is what they did. These are the steps they take. Confidence in Tylenol rose. Stocks rose. You know, you look at it that way. I'm looking at doing a case study on the project I'm doing with the area high school students. I've done a lot of research talking about that if journalism is to survive, it really needs to be taught at the high school level. Need to get them excited about it because sports communication is my interest area. I've developed a dual credit class in sports broadcasting with some of the area students, and I'm looking at doing a case study. And I talked to a couple other professors, said if I'm the one embedded in this, if I'm the one that started it, wrote the grant, got the stuff, did the training, produces the show, does all the teaching through it, am I too embedded in it to do this case? And they said, nah, because in this situation, it's a little bit different. You're doing the case, and I would do it for educational purposes, looking at this case of this is how you work collaborate between the university and high schools to produce a show and to promote the field. And so you can do it that way. But I have to go step by step, and this is what I did, this is why I did it, this is the reaction I got from the students, those sorts of things, okay? What are you laughing at?
Just a 90s sitcom singing reference.
Okay.
You said step by step, and I said step by step.
Oh, nice. Okay. So again, I probably should have started on this side, but it worked out better the other way. It's an in-depth description and analysis of a bounded system. And that's the thing that I really want to stress to you all that last year I really wasn't able to get this point across. It is one specific system. It is not, you're not doing a case study of how schools handle school shootings. You're doing a case study of how one school handled one school shooting. Hopefully no school ever has to deal with more than one. But how they handled that one shooting, okay? You can get even more detailed and go into their security or their media relations. You don't have to. You could take a look at all the aspects of it, or multiple aspects of it, okay? Used a lot in anthropology and law, in medicine, in criminal investigation, and like we've talked about in PR. Education, we use it. I look at journalism or broadcasting. I'm not really sure where in those two areas you would do a case study. I suppose you could look at how a publication handled like a political rally or how they covered like Selma. We were watching again on that show I was telling you all about, the Mankind, the story of all of us, and one of the stories is about, huh?
How long is this show?
It's a mini-series. It's like 12, I think.
Okay.
And they were talking about there that in Selma is where breaking news came from, because there was a cameraman there filming it, and he was able to break the news that night. They broke into programming, showed it across the country, and you couldn't ignore Selma, because it was out there for everybody to see how African Americans were fighting for the right to vote, and the police attacked them. And so that was out there.
I don't know if it was a case study, but somebody documented the journalist reactions to the Virginia Tech shooting and like how they covered it and then how they dealt with it afterward. Would that be kind of a case study, or is that something different?
That might be a phenomenological study,
Okay.
how they dealt with the phenomenon of covering that sort of a crisis. Yeah, because you're looking at each of those individual people from probably different media outlets.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm thinking is you would maybe look at how ABC handled Selma, the coverage of Selma, because you want to look at the decisions they had to make, because I mean it was a time where who was running ABC? White males. Did they want to cover it? Did they not? Did they want to spin it a certain way? Did they, you know? So I guess that, in that way, you can maybe do a case study using journalism, but not as likely as you would in these other areas, okay? It's ideal for when you can't control or ID the key variables. This was a successful PR campaign. Why? And we're going to assume it's successful because the company was not blasted in the news on any of the channels, on the liberal or conservative media. Nobody really had anything negative to say about them. Stock prices went up, consumer confidence was up, the employees seemed to be fine with it, nobody lost their jobs, they recovered well. Why? What was the key variable, or what were the key variables that made it happen? We can't identify them, we can't really control them, because you really don't control much for anything other than an experiment. So they're really helpful for that. And this is a big thing to keep in mind. It can't be studied until it happens. You can't study it until it's happened. It's very after the fact. Now I could say, I want to do a case study of how university relations handled the media relations aspect of President Obama's speech. I can say beforehand I want to do it. And during the process, I'm going to maybe keep a timeline. But I can't really study what happened until afterward. Because why?
You hadn't given the speech.
You hadn't given a speech.
You're also waiting for the effects.
I've got to find out what the effect was. Did it work or didn't it work? If I'm doing an analysis of this in the process, I'm probably going to say, oh, that didn't work, let's change it and adjust this. Well, that's good PR practice, but it doesn't really work very well for a study because I'm changing what happened. Okay?
Didn't work very well for the president either if it didn't work.
Hmm?
Didn't work very well for the president either if it wasn't successful.
Right. Yep. No, you're right. If I wasn't successful in my media relations and nobody showed up, yeah.
On the previous
Little side note on that here in just a minute.
On the previous point that you wrote on the board, I understand that it's ideal when you cannot control the key variables, but why is it important that you can't identify them? Like, how do you know what to look for then when you're looking at your case study? What does that
You
mean?
don't until this.
Right, so you should try to identify your key variables when
Yes.
you're studying it.
That's what you're trying to find out while you're studying it.
But when it's initially happening, then you shouldn't be looking for those key variables or be able to identify them?
Well, you're probably not going to be looking at it until it's over anyway. Then you're going to go back and you're going to be interviewing people, you're going to be looking at documentation, you're going to be looking at results. So you're going to be not doing that until it's over anyway. So you won't have a clue what those, you might have an idea, given your experience, okay? Given your experience, you might have an idea of what some of those variables are, but you're really not going to know until you get into it, and you're not going to be able to get into it until after it's already happened.
So then after you get into it and do your interviews and all of your research, then you should be able to identify key variables?
Yeah, that's what you want to find out.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
what were those key variables that made this successful or a failure?
Okay.
Because we either want to duplicate this or we want to get rid of it. Now keep it in mind, in qualitative research, what do we typically say is the major weakness of qualitative research?
Researcher.
Catherine?
No, I messed up.
Oh, not the researcher.
Predictive,
Hmm?
not predictive.
No, not so much that's not predictive.
Results are objective?
Mm.
Subjective.
Yeah, whatever that one is.
So sample size,
Hmm.
just that it's, the sample sizes.
Sample size is smaller,
It's
so
not generalizable.
you can't generalize it.
Okay.
You're not going to necessarily be able to generalize this anywhere else, because what happened here at UCM, not necessarily going to be the same case at KU. We're going to have to do a little bit more, even with the president coming, we're going to have to do a little bit more at UCM to get media coverage than at KU. KU's getting that kind of media coverage all the time. They already have relationships with a lot of the bigger media as it is, okay?
Are case studies like more unique, like they only happen once, like, it's just.
You know, I see a lot of case studies. When I go back and look at research and I'm looking up articles, I see a lot of case studies. They're fun.
Okay.
I've not actually done one, but I mean, I've read several, and in reading them, I'm like, man, that would be interesting, because you really get to, you know exactly what it is you're looking at, you know exactly why you're looking at it, and you really get to dig into that one situation. And so therefore, you really get invested in it. When I was working on my dissertation, I called Mike Alden, who was the athletic director at Mizzou. And this was right after the Ricky Clemens scandal. Ricky Clemens was a basketball player at Mizzou. And he had gotten in trouble with the law, and had mucky mucks with the university. I think the chancellor, some of the board were trying to cover for him and protect him and help him out. And Mike Alden, who has a reputation of being kind of a horse's patoot, I don't know him, but I mean, that's kind of the reputation he has. When I was interviewing him and trying to get some information, he said, "So what are you working on?" And I told him, I said, "I kind of ultimately would like to be the official researcher for College Sports Information Directors of America." And he goes, "I would love it if you came over to Mizzou and did a case study on how we totally botched the PR for the Ricky Clemens case." Seriously? You're inviting me to come look at how you screwed it up? Most ADs don't want anybody looking at that sort of thing. But I thought, man, that would be cool. Now have I done it? No, I became a professor and I haven't had time to go do that one. That's a pretty big one, but yeah, so you get to get really dug into that one case.
But they are like unique
Yes.
cases. Like,
Yes.
like, I don't say that Barack Obama is not coming back, but what I'm saying is that it's like, for instance, in the phenomenology part of like investigations, like they can happen in like 5 years or 10 years or whatever.
Mhm.
And in this case, in case studies, are they just like happen, like, I don't know. For instance, Tylenol,
Mhm.
I mean, it's really hard for them to do that again.
Yeah.
So that's what.
We hope.
Yeah, of course, yes. So
Yeah.
that is.
What's a longitudinal study? It's something I do over time, that I at a set point in time say, okay, I'm going to start researching this right now, and 10 years down the road, I'm going to see how that has developed or how it has changed. Can you do that with a case study?
Nope.
No, because you don't start studying it until after it's done.
Okay.
It is a bounded system. It is bound by place. It is bound by time. It is bound by the individuals involved. It is all in that one area. Knew you were waiting to have a question.
But you mentioned that part of the case study is the effects of it and how people reacted to it and that sort of thing. Over time, might the reaction be different?
I have to decide what that time frame is going to be, and it's typically
So for your
right
case
afterwards.
study, you have to define the parameters before, you can't start doing it and then, oh, now people are starting to change their mind
Right.
about whether that was good or bad.
Right.
Okay.
And you typically, because you're looking at what they did, I mean, you have to have an idea, was it effective or not? Was it successful or not? You're gonna have to say, okay, we're gonna give it a month afterwards. Because it's like you said, you could go on infantile. I mean, Tylenol still is held in high regard and people still talk about that. You look at Exxon. Exxon, they're back out of the woods now, but it's because of time. Look at BP and what happened in the Gulf. And right away, there was BP and 2 other companies that were involved in this, and they were all blaming the other one and trying to pass the buck. BP has finally said, all right, we're not taking full blame here, but we played a part, and we're gonna do what we can to help. And BP, people look pretty good at BP right now, okay? Look better than they did, all right? And so, but that was how many years ago, you know? So you have to have a set time that you're gonna look at. Because again, you're bounded by a time frame.
Could you look at cases that are controversially positive or negative? Like one person might do a case study
Sure.
on how this was successful, while another person might do a case study on the exact same situation and say why it wasn't successful?
To do that, you're gonna have to say, again, you're gonna have to set up your parameters and say, you're looking at whether or not it was successful based on stock prices. I'm looking at, was it successful based on employee morale and employee confidence? So yeah, they maybe, their stock still went up and they were able to get people confident in them. But to do that, they really had to be blasting the people inside there and really work the dog out of the people who work there. They've had a ton of turnover. They spent a lot more money because they have that turnover, they have more training, and their people are very dissatisfied with the company. So they may look good on the outside, but they're falling apart on the inside. Yeah. And you can look at 2 cases. I mean, you could look at Virginia Tech versus Florida, because Florida had a shooting whenever I was in college, okay? and see what was the difference. They were like 10, 15 years apart. What was the difference in these two cases? How did they handle things differently? And did they learn from one another?
So the case study is really not longitudinal
No.
because of the time bounds?
Yeah, and longitudinal, I mean, you can look at it and say, well, yeah, it took place over 3 or 4 months. That's not what we consider longitudinal. Longitudinal, we think long time.
So could you do a case study over something that happened, like you decide to wait a month after and then you start your case study?
Well, you're not necessarily going to do it right away afterward.
Well, just wait.
That's the thing about a case study is I could go back and do a case study now about Exxon.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, however far your time frame is since it happened, you do your case study, then could you go back and do the same case study, or somebody, or maybe you could, I guess, and see if you have different results, like if anything changed, or should it not change?
Well, are you kind of talking about what Rachel was talking about, that
Yeah,
their
that's-
impression might change? You're not really going to do a study of that because the way they handled it, their situation didn't change. That was founded by that time. You might follow up later just with an article, but not a research article about now over time, how do people feel? What do people think?
Okay, I have a question. With the longitudinal study, did you say that one, you have to set up the specific time parameters, like I'm going to study this for 10 years, or do you just keep studying it until you?
No, you need to set up a beginning.
And so that's,
Because otherwise when you
that's
go-
a parallel with case studies. They have that in common.
They do,
right?
yes, they do
Okay,
have,
I
yeah.
just wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
had that.
because with a longitudinal study, when do you know to end?
Right,
I mean, you're gonna get to
Exactly.
some point, are you gonna end just because you're tired of it?
Right.
You could, but
Okay.
you're better off to set, remember in research is a designed practice. It's not a haphazard practice. It's got rules, it's got structure, and you have a design set. Well, part of that design you need to have, now how long am I looking? Okay, Mike.
Can you do longitudinal studies that do book benchmarks where you're gonna check it here and check it there?
Yep.
We can allow it to be indefinite over a couple hundred years if you start it, and no, or even more.
Well, good luck if you can go for a couple hundred years.
Well, for somebody else to continue with.
But how do you know they're gonna do it?
Boom.
Boom.
You know.
Yeah, girl.
You don't know anything, you know, Sunday it's supernova tomorrow. 'cause we don't understand.
True. I suppose you could, if you've got a team together and you keep passing along and get them to keep going with it, it's not likely that you're gonna do that. And it's not to say,
Doesn't the government do longitudinal studies that go through generations? You set up?
I don't know that I would call
I'm thinking
that-
about Appalachia in particular, when stuff I read long ago. They had no idea what research methods were at the time. It seems as though they were talking about studies they'd done turn of the 20th century, and then on into the 30s, and then into the 60s. And that's going, the researcher, if he started in the 1890s, obviously they same research.
so it was maybe it was an organization that said, we're gonna continue to study this throughout time.
Indefinite.
Yes, in that situation, because you may wanna look at the effects of X. Coal dust on this region over time, because we need to keep track of that. That's a little bit different than a communication study because of the impact. Like, I don't know if you call it a longitudinal study as so much as a continuous study. Because longitudinal is a set, okay, I've got 15 minutes for you. I've got a set time that I'm gonna be looking at versus a continuous, we need to continue looking at this throughout history.
Different study.
Yeah.
Now,
It's the same study, same thing we're looking at, but we're just checking progress, see if it works. I mean, you think about like mortality rates. We've been looking at those for how long, we'll continue to look at those. Okay. What I was gonna say about when the president came, I learned something about media coverage for political candidates. Do you know where we held his visit? In the Student Rec Center. Really compact, really tight, really ungodly hot. And everybody was like, why didn't they do this in the union, or in the multi-purpose building where they have the chairs and stuff? Well, you know why? There were like 300 or 400 people packed into there, and it looked cram-packed. Multi-seats, 7,000, 8,000 people. What are 400 people gonna look like in a multi? I'd like, so you guys figure out how to make it. Man, it was just flowing with people. No, you just put them in a cracker box. And it really looks like there's a lot of people versus in a bigger venue. And that's the sort of thing that happens all the time because, that's part of the planning process. Nothing to do with what we're talking about here, but I thought it was really interesting. One thing that I did want to bring up, and this has nothing to do with case studies, has everything to do with research. One thing that I wanted to bring up, why we do the research and why you need to think about the different variables. One of the big discussions right now in the media has been, I always say vaccinations, that's for animals. Immunizations. And whether or not children should be immunized or not, because there was some study looking to see if there's a correlation between immunization and autism. Well, a lot of research has come out since then saying there is no correlation, there is no tie. The reason that there seems to be is because when do signs of autism start showing up? When kids start going to school. When do kids have to get immunized? Right before they go to school. So that's where experiments come in and why because to look and say, oh, well, you had this kid immunized and now look, autism. And there could possibly be. But you also have to think about the time factor there. There was another thing that we were talking about, as my wife and I were talking about. I said, man, I gotta remember to use that in class. I can't remember what it was, but it was that same sort of thing that, this typically happens, they typically happen at this. Oh, I remember what it was. It was when I was talking about my cholesterol. And I said, well, is there proof that if you eat oatmeal, it lowers your cholesterol? And my doctor said, there's never been really any definitive study to say if you eat oatmeal, it lowers your cholesterol. The thing is, if you eat oatmeal, you're probably not eating bacon and eggs. Bacon and eggs have been proven to raise your cholesterol. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the oatmeal's lowering it, it's not adding to it. These things we're adding, and now you're not doing them. That is our job as researchers, is to look for those variables and look and see, now, could there be another reason why these two overlap? This didn't cause this one or have an effect here. This is much more of a discussion for my quantitative class and my qualitative class. But that's why we do experiments versus doing a survey. Do you eat oatmeal? Yes. What's your cholesterol? 100. Do you eat bacon and eggs? Yes. What's your cholesterol? 150. Oatmeal. Oatmeal eaters have lower cholesterol. Oatmeal must lower cholesterol. No. But you could do an experiment to find those things. So that's the importance of thinking about what it is you're trying to determine, what variables are there, what methodology to use. Same sort of thing here. Okay, I knew I could make a tie back. Kind of like what Leah was saying. What were you saying?
Which time?
You were talking about the journalists and their reactions after covering these tragedies. Think about what it is you're trying to determine, and that's going to help you determine what method do I use. Am I looking at a method, looking at a case study, or am I looking at a phenomenological study? Okay. Catherine or Mike, one of you had your Mike.
What does SE stand for now?
SE?
Yeah.
Special event. Meaning that they do lots of special events. Okay. Questions? Thoughts? Comments? Okay. Good stuff. Thank you all.